Okay, so we've got all your source material here, and we're diving deep into, well, British versus American English.
Yeah, it's a topic people think they know, but there's actually a lot under the surface.
Right. Everyone knows tomato, tomato, but the sources you sent over, they dig into some really surprising stuff about how things actually, diverged.
Exactly.
So think of this as like your shortcut to being genuinely clued in on all these differences. Our mission today is basically to unpack these sources, pull out the really interesting bits, and figure out what it all tells us.
Precisely. It's not just about listing words, it's the why, isn't it? The pronunciation, the spelling quirks, grammar, even culture. We're going to try and touch on all of that based on what you've gathered.
All right, let's jump right in there. Vocabulary. That's usually the first thing people notice, right? Where you hear a word from across the pond and just think, are they making that up?
Happens all the time, like lorry for truck
Totally. Or biscuit for cookie
or, rubbish bin.
instead of trash can. Yeah. And the car is boot.
Ah, yes. The boot versus the trunk.
Putting your luggage in the car's boot in the U.S., I mean, can you imagine? It sounds like you're trying to stuff your suitcase into, like, actual footwear.
It really does sound odd contextually, yeah. But what's fascinating, and the sources touch on this, is how old some of these words are.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, like lorry. Apparently, it might come from an Old English word lurry, meaning to drag,
Oh,
while
yeah.
truck seems to trace back to Greek trochos for wheel. So, they're both totally legitimate words, just with different ancient roots.
That makes sense. And the biscuit thing. That one always gets me.
How so?
Well, in Britain, it's like a crunchy, sweet thing you have with tea. But here, a biscuit is, soft, buttery. You have it with gravy usually.
Completely different things. Same word, totally separate food items, separate cultural slots. It's a perfect little example of that divergence.
So words are one thing, but then there's how we say them, pronunciation. This is where things can get really interesting.
Yes, the spicy part, as you say, beyond the classic tomato.
Right. What else stood out from the sources?
Well, take schedule. British English often goes with schedule
Whereas Americans say ski jewel
or advertisement. You hear advertisement in the UK.
and advertisement over here.
Uh-huh.
Mobile is another good one. MOH bile.
Versus just mobile.
And route. Often route in Britain, route in America.
So is there like a general pattern the sources pointed to?
Kind of. It seems American English often tends towards maybe simplifying sounds.
Right.
While British English sometimes keeps older forms or borrows more French-style nuances.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here's the kicker, the really interesting insight from the sources.
Oh, what is it?
Believe it or not, modern British English has actually changed more from Shakespearean English than American English has.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So in some ways, Americans actually sound a bit closer to how Brits spoke back in the 17th century.
Wow. History's weird.
Isn't it just language is always moving? Okay, speaking of things changing,
Yeah.
or maybe not changing, spelling, or, spelling. This is where you see all those extra letters sometimes in British English.
That extra U in color.
Yep. And center ending ear.
Or using C instead of Z in words like realize. Defense with a C.
Right. So why? Is it just fancier?
Well, the sources suggest British English held on to a lot of spellings that reflected French influence. Think center, fibre, theater.
Adds a certain je ne sais quoi, maybe?
Perhaps. And on the American side, a lot of the simplification, getting rid of those letters, is actually down to one guy, largely.
Oh, yeah. Who?
Noah Webster,
Right.
the dictionary guy.
Right, Webster's Dictionary.
He had the strong belief that the United States needed its own distinct national identity, separate from Britain, and reforming spelling was part of establishing that.
So it wasn't just like accidental typos becoming standard.
Not entirely, no. It seems it was more like a conscious choice, a bit of linguistic rebellion, you
Yeah.
could say, declaring independence in spelling.
Huh. Okay. Now what about grammar? This feels a bit more subtle. Less obvious than spelling or saying lift instead of elevator.
It can be, yeah. But there are definite differences. The sources highlight things like got versus gotten.
Ah, yeah, like in the UK, you'd maybe hear, I've got to go.
Exactly. Whereas in American English, it might be I gotta go, or for the past participle, I have gotten better.
And gotten feels somehow older.
It is. That's the fascinating part. Gotten was actually standard in England centuries ago. The British mostly dropped it over time, but Americans, well, they kept it.
So this ties back to that pronunciation point, doesn't it? American English sometimes preserved older forms.
Precisely. It didn't always simplify. Sometimes it just froze things in time, linguistically speaking.
So next time my British friend jokes about Americans butchering the language,
You can politely point out you're just keeping 17th century English alive.
I like that. Any other big grammar points?
Another one the sources mention is the present perfect tense. That's the have eaten structure. British English tends to use it maybe a bit more readily, especially for recent past actions with present relevance. So UK, have you eaten? Versus more commonly in the US, did you eat?
Right. Same basic meaning, just a slightly different grammatical way of framing it.
Exactly. It shows grammar isn't just about rules, it's about nuance, how you relate actions to time. And let's be honest,
Yeah.
knowing these little differences is great ammunition for sounding smart at brunch.
True enough. Okay, where things get really fun, I think, is idioms, expressions. This is where the differences can be just hilarious.
Oh, definitely. Like hearing someone say, I'm absolutely knackered, just really, really tired, like I'm totally wiped out in the US.
Okay, knackered. Got it.
Mm.
Or throw a spanner in the works.
Right. Which is the same as the American throw a wrench in the works.
Same idea, different toolbox.
Exactly. And idioms, they're little windows into culture, aren't they? The sources kind of suggest Brits often go for understatement, maybe a bit of irony.
While American idioms can feel more
Well-
direct, more energetic,
Something like that, yeah. It's a generalization, of course, but there's often a different feel.
and that brings us to like the bigger picture, culture. Accent stereotypes. Language isn't just words and grammar, it's loaded with personality, right?
Absolutely. Perceptions. British English often gets tagged as more formal, classy, maybe sarcastic.
While American English might be seen as friendly, enthusiastic,
Yeah.
perhaps a bit blunt sometimes.
Those are definitely common stereotypes. Like, the difference between someone saying, I dare say this tea is rather subpar, versus, yo, this drink sus KS.
Haha. Okay, maybe a slight exaggeration, but yeah. It's not just how you speak, it's what people think it says about you.
And one really insightful point from the sources is how these perceptions get amplified globally.
How so?
Well, the British accent, particularly certain kinds, has been marketed worldwide as sophisticated or elite. Think, the BBC, posh characters in films, James Bond.
Right, that classic received pronunciation.
Exactly. Whereas American media, Hollywood, pop music, tech has just saturated the globe, making American English almost the default version many people encounter first.
So that's why so many people learning English as a second language often start with American English.
It's a huge factor, yeah. It's just the sheer volume of exposure through media.
Okay, so that leads to the big practical question for anyone listening right now. Which English should you actually learn, if you have a choice?
And the honest answer, based on everything, is, well, it really depends on what you want to do with it.
Right, like if your goal is international business.
The sources suggest American English is probably more widely used in that specific context currently.
Okay, but what if you want to, say, study in the UK?
Mm-hmm.
Or you just, I don't know, want to sound posh at parties?
Then yeah, focusing on British English might be more your style, learning the specific accent and vocabulary.
But for just general use, travel, films, music, talking to people online.
Honestly, a mix is probably best. Be aware of the main differences. Understand both, because the real world is full of hybrids anyway, right? People use bits of both.
So, no wrong answer, really.
Not at all. It's about what works for you and your goals.
And we should probably add, it's not just one British accent and one American accent, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. That's a crucial point. Not all Brits sound like the Queen or Hugh Grant.
And not all Americans sound like a California surfer or a New York cabbie.
Exactly. The regional variety on both sides is immense. Think about the difference between someone from, say, Newcastle, a Geordie accent, versus someone from London. Or a Texan versus a Bostonian.
Or Liverpool's a Scouser.
Yeah. Each has its own unique sounds, words, rhythms. It's incredibly rich. That could be a whole other deep dive, honestly.
It really could. But it just underlines the main point, right? Whether it's technically British or American, it's all English. It's alive. It changes it beautifully.
Yeah.
Chaotic.
A living language. We've touched on the words, the sounds, the spelling, grammar, those fun idioms, and the cultural weight behind it all, drawing from your sources.
Hopefully you feel genuinely well-informed now. Like you get not just what the differences are, but maybe a little of the why.
And maybe you're ready to settle that Shakespeare debate once and for all.
So after digging into all of this,
Mm-hmm.
which side are you on? Something to think about.